The development context of Code Violet gives off a strong feeling of a project with a solid identity, yet surrounded by controversy and expectation at the same time. Coming from Team Kill Media, which had already drawn attention with the failure of Quantum Error, you can sense the studio wants to get it right this time, with a very direct concept: third-person action and horror with dinosaurs, a sci-fi conspiracy, and a very distinct protagonist, Violet. Just looking at the official materials, it already looks like the kind of game designed to become a darling for those missing something in the Dino Crisis vein, but with a more modern face. The story's backdrop, with humanity exiled on TRAPPIST-1E after Earth became uninhabitable, seems more interesting to me than what I'd expect from a dinosaur shooter game. The idea of a colony using time travel technology to kidnap women from the past as gestational surrogates is heavy, almost uncomfortable, and this adds a darker layer to the Code Violet universe. The impression is that the game doesn't just want to be monster chasing you down a hallway, but also wants to poke at themes of control, despair, and ethics, totally distorted in the name of survival. Visually, the game seems to want to sell the next-gen action horror package at all costs. Unreal, dense alien jungle scenarios, facilities full of neon, and a lighting showcase with ray tracing. In the trailers, it's the kind of game that makes you want to pause frame by frame just to see the work on light, shadow, and reflection, especially in indoor areas and on the creature's skin. At the same time, there is that lingering doubt. A studio of this size promising this visual level always raises the question of whether, in practice, the performance will keep up with what is being shown. On the gameplay side, what has been shown points to a mix of shooting combat with melee confrontation moments, survival horror inventory, and some environmental puzzles. Combat scenes with raptors and larger creatures give a sense of very direct action, almost quote-unquote arcade, but still with that ammunition and resource management typical of horror games. It doesn't seem like a game that will reinvent the genre, but rather a project that embraces various cliches, which honestly isn't a problem if the feel of the weapons, the weight of the enemies, and the pacing of the arenas are polished. The release context is also curious, a PS5 exclusive, focused on a very specific audience and with a conscious decision to skip PC, partly due to fear of, quote, vulgar mods. This already creates a narrative around the game before it's even out, dividing the community between those who think the stance is backward and those who see it as a way to, quote, protect the vision of the devs. For a title that could gain a lot of traction on PC as a sort of spiritual successor to Dino Crisis, this choice sounds more emotional than strategic. Regarding development itself, you can sense a certain climate of turbulence, but not exactly a disaster. The game was delayed more than once and ended up sliding to January 10th, 2026. But Team Kill themselves made it clear that the title is already gold, and that the problem was linked to the deluxe editions and bonus unlocking. In the end, they decided to release only a standard edition, including all extras, which, in practice, sounds like a decision that is actually friendly to the player, even if it projects the image of a studio that is a bit clumsy with the commercial side. Overall, seeing only what the developer has released so far, Code Violet strikes me as that typical passion project that could become a cult classic or a bomb with no middle ground. The concept is strong, the visuals are flashy, and the mixture of dinosaurs with conspiratorial sci-fi has the look of a game people will remember, even if it isn't perfect. The feeling is that Team Kill is betting everything on a very aggressive package of visual, marketing, and themes, and now the big question is whether the controller in hand will be as satisfying as the fantasy they constructed in the trailers. The story seems like that heavy mix of sci-fi and horror that can work very well, but could also end up sounding like just another Escape from Earth plus Crazy Experiments formula. The premise of humanity exiled on TRAPPIST-1E, facing extinction due to sterility, already brings an atmosphere of desperation and urgency that gives weight to the plot. The fact that the solution is kidnapping women from the past to serve as forced surrogates is disturbing, and this creates a morally somber backdrop that goes beyond the monster in the hallway. Violet Sinclair, the protagonist, enters this world completely lost, ripped from her time, and thrown into a futuristic reality where the lines between past, present, and distorted science blur. She isn't a ready-made superhero, but a normal person who needs to discover her strength throughout the journey, which reminds me a bit of the character arc of Lara Croft in the early Tomb Raiders, or Abby in The Last of Us Part 2. This evolution seems interesting to me because it gives space for the player to connect with the character while she faces real dilemmas and questions herself about what is right or wrong in this distorted world. What catches my attention most is how the story mixes conspiracy, broken ethics, and a touch of science fiction that borders on the absurd, yet is plausible within the game's universe. The discovery that the bioengineering complex is full of genetically modified dinosaurs, in addition to hostile forces and failing AI systems, creates a chaotic and unpredictable scenario. The feeling is that Violet is fighting not only for survival, but also to unravel secrets that could change the fate of humanity, adding a layer of urgency to the plot. The narrative also seems to want to explore heavy themes, such as the cost of survival, abuse of power, and the manipulation of human lives in the name of science. The conspiracy behind the surrogate program and the ethical collapse of the Aeon colony remind me of stories from movies like Gattaca or Blade Runner, where scientific progress clashes with human values. This can generate strong and reflective moments, especially when Violet begins to discover what happened to the other women kidnapped before her. The plot still leaves room for plot twists and difficult choices, which could make the end of the game memorable, depending on how Team Kill Media explores these possibilities. The sensation is that Violet's fate won't just be escaping the complex, but also deciding whether to expose the whole truth or simply survive, carrying the weight of everything she discovered. Visually and environmentally, the story promises to be immersive, with scenarios mixing futuristic installations, alien jungles, and laboratories full of secrets. I think this helps build a dense atmosphere, where each new environment can reveal a new layer of the mystery, encouraging the player to explore and unravel clues. Overall, the story of Code Violet seems to be a bold attempt to mix horror, sci-fi, and ethical dilemmas into a plot that can be both a survival adventure and a reflection on what we are willing to do to stay alive. From what has been shown so far, it has the potential to surprise, especially if the narrative knows how to balance action, suspense, and moments of true emotional tension. The gameplay conveys that sensation of tense and unpredictable survival, typical of the best action horror games, but with a very modern and visceral touch. The fact that Violet is a common character without military training already shows that the game won't hand you powers or easy outs. Every inventory choice, every saved bullet, every decision to fight or flee will truly weigh on your experience. Combat seems to be quite dynamic, mixing shooting, melee, and even stealth moments, which keeps the pacing varied and requires constant attention. The dinosaurs aren't just monsters in the hallway. They have distinct behaviors and require different strategies. Some you need to face with gunfire, others with stealth, and some even with a combination of both. The status system, such as poison requiring an antidote or bleeding that reduces your maximum health, adds layers of tension and forces you to think before entering each confrontation. Exploration also seems to be a strong part of the game, with environmental and mechanical puzzles scattered throughout the complex, alongside clues and logs to reconstruct the story and understand what happened there. This gives extra weight to curiosity because it's not just run and gun. You need to observe, memorize details, and even risk yourself in dangerous areas to find the next clue. Inventory management is another point that intrigues me. With limited space, you need to prioritize between weapons, healing items, and tools to solve puzzles, creating real dilemmas in every new room or corridor. This reminds me of classics like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, where every decision can save you or put you in serious trouble. The technical side is also impressive. The use of Unreal Engine 5 with ray tracing, 3D audio, and haptic feedback promises a truly immersive experience, where every action, whether firing, dodging, or solving a puzzle, seems to have weight and consequence. The trailers show detailed environments with lights, shadows, and sounds that amplify the tension, and this could be a giant differentiator for those who like to feel the environment as part of the gameplay. Still, you can sense that the game might be quite demanding, especially for those not used to true survival horror, where errors have real consequences and progress requires patience and observation. It doesn't seem like a game that will smooth the path or give you obvious hints, which can be a positive point for those who enjoy challenges, but might also frustrate those who prefer something more direct. From what has been shown so far, Code Violet's gameplay seems to be a well-dosed mixture of action, suspense, and puzzles, with a dose of difficulty and immersion that could make the game a memorable experience for those who like to feel truly vulnerable and alert at every step. Code Violet has a heavy sci-fi aesthetic, full of neon, alien jungles, and futuristic installations that look like they came out of an 80s science fiction movie, but with all the power of Unreal Engine 5. The use of ray tracing and dynamic lighting creates a dense, tense, and immersive atmosphere, and you can feel that the team wanted to deliver something visually striking for the launch. But looking more closely, I noticed some points that bother me. The character animations, mainly Violet's, seem a bit stiff and artificial in certain moments, as if the movements weren't fully integrated with the rest of the visuals. This takes away a bit of the fluidity and emotion in scenes that should be dramatic or intense, leaving me with the feeling that the game prioritized the visuals of the scenes over the naturalness of the movements. Another point that bothers me is the design of the clothes and the protagonists' models. Even knowing that the studio justified the PS5 exclusivity to avoid vulgar mods, I found it strange to release promotional materials with quite revealing outfits. This gives me an impression of hypocrisy, as if the game were using the character's look to attract attention, but at the same time wanting to control the image in a contradictory way. I also think that, in some environments, the visuals end up appearing repetitive or generic. There are areas that seem to copy formulas already seen in other sci-fi horror games and don't explore the full creative potential of the universe the game promises. This can make the visual experience tiring, especially if the player expects constant variety and originality. The menus and interfaces also seem a bit outdated to me, as if they hadn't been integrated into the game's visual style. This breaks the immersion a bit and leaves me with the feeling that certain aspects were neglected or poorly executed. Despite the game having interesting visuals in certain scenes, I feel there is an exaggerated reliance on visual effects to mask flaws or hide animation and design problems. This might work to impress at first glance, but it could disappoint those looking for a cohesive and immersive visual experience from start to finish. Overall, I think Code Violet's graphics are beautiful and ambitious, but they may hide real problems of consistency, animation, and aesthetic choices. Performance is one of the most controversial and debated points so far, mainly because the game promises to use the maximum power of the PS5, but also because Team Kill Media's track record leaves many people suspicious. From what was shown in the trailers and reports from those who have already seen gameplay, the visuals are truly impressive. Ray tracing, high-resolution textures, global illumination, and animations made with performance capture give the game a next-gen look, and you can feel the team wanted to impress with visuals above all else. However, what worries me is that the real performance seems far from perfect, especially on the base version of the PS5. The game runs at 30 FPS on the standard PS5 and 60 FPS on the PS5 Pro, but the devs themselves admitted they had to sacrifice resources to maintain this frame rate. And this could mean the game will feel sluggish or less responsive in certain situations, especially in scenes with many visual effects or enemies. This has already been a recurring complaint in analyses from those who saw demos and gameplay. Character movements seeming heavy, stiff animations, and combat that doesn't flow as expected from an action game. The use of the PS5 SSD ensures fast loading and smooth transitions between scenes, which is a positive point for maintaining the game's pace, but it doesn't solve the problem of gameplay fluidity itself. The DualSense haptic feedback and adaptive triggers seem to be well implemented, adding immersion in moments of combat and exploration, but they don't compensate if the game doesn't run well or if the control sensation isn't satisfactory. Another point is that, despite the breathtaking visuals, there are reports that the animation of enemies and secondary characters can be a bit repetitive or even artificial, which takes away a bit of the immersion in critical moments. This might be more evident in confrontations with dinosaurs or in cutscenes, where facial expression and body movements aren't as natural as expected from a game promising quality performance capture. Still, the fact that the game is optimized to run at a locked 30 FPS on the base version is a relief, because it means that even if it isn't as fluid as 60 FPS, at least it shouldn't stutter or drop frames unpredictably, which is essential for an action horror game. For those with the PS5 Pro, the experience should be smoother, with 60 FPS and better use of visual resources, but the upgrade price might not be worth it just for that. Performance also seems to be influenced by the type of scene. Open areas, intense combat, or sequences with many visual effects might impact performance more, while calmer or linear moments should run more smoothly. This means the player might feel spikes of stuttering or slowness precisely when they need quick reactions the most, which can be frustrating in decisive moments. Overall, Code Violet's performance seems to be all or nothing, if you are willing to give up fluidity in exchange for breathtaking visuals and an immersive experience. It might be a good pick, but if you prioritize responsive gameplay, natural animations, and precise control, it might be better to wait for post-launch reviews or test the game before buying. Code Violet seems to be a game that will please especially those who enjoy futuristic horror, mystery, and a good dose of action with touches of survival. The game mixes elements of Dino Crisis with the protagonist facing dinosaurs, conspiracies, and ethical dilemmas in a dystopian future, which can be very engaging for those who like stories with twists and dense environments. If you are more critical regarding development quality and prefer to wait for analyses and reviews, it might be better to wait a few weeks after launch. There are reports that the game might be an attempt to capitalize on Dino Crisis nostalgia, but there is still no guarantee that it will deliver a solid experience from beginning to end. The exclusivity for PlayStation 5 and the decision not to launch on PC to avoid improper mods are points that may influence your decision, especially if you don't own the console or prefer playing on PC. Those who own a PS5 and are looking for something different in the day futuristic horror genre might be pleasantly surprised, but it is important to keep in mind that it is still too early to guarantee the game will exceed expectations. Overall, Code Violet seems indicated for those who enjoy engaging stories, tense gameplay, and well-constructed environments. But those who prefer more tested games with consolidated ratings might want to wait a bit. The game has potential, but it remains a risk, especially for those who don't want to be frustrated with titles that promise a lot but don't deliver in practice.